Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Please subscribe and keep watching more details. Julie Chrisley forced to take the long route back to prison. Julie Chrisley is en route back to prison following her resentencing hearing last week. The Chrisley Knows Best star seems to be taking the long way back to FMC Lexington, where she will serve the remainder of her sentence. It could possibly take Julie up to 60 days to be back in the Bureau of Prisons (BOP) custody. Here is what we know about Julie's resentencing and her upcoming travel back to Kentucky. Savannah lashes out following Julie's resentencing. Todd and Julie Chrisley were first sentenced to 19 years combined in prison in 2022 for bank fraud and tax evasion. They immediately began the appeals process. The couple reported to prison in January 2023. As fans know, Julie Chrisley attended her resentencing hearing in Atlanta, Georgia, on September 25. The court previously vacated Julie's sentence due to insufficient evidence that the reality star was involved in the crimes prior to 2007. However, the judge ruled to keep Julie's sentence the same. She received the same initial 84-month sentence that she received in 2022. Of course, there will be reductions for good behavior, and her sentence was already reduced by 14 months. As far as the court is concerned, though, the 7-year sentence was adequate for what she was convicted of. This came as a shock to her daughter, Savannah Chrisley, who thought that she'd receive some additional time off from her sentence. Savannah also publicly slammed the judge and prosecutor outside the courthouse following the hearing last week. The Chrisley Knows Best star said the judge chastised her in court, stating that she'd been lying to Chloe and Grayson Chrisley about when Julie would be coming home. Upon leaving the courtroom, Savannah Chrisley called the prosecution uneducated. Julie Chrisley on the long road back to Lexington. Now, fans think that Savannah's words may have had an impact on Julie Chrisley behind bars. As previously reported, Julie was forced to take the long way to her hearing in Atlanta. She spent around 45 days on the road, give or take. This is something that wardens allegedly do to inmates who complain too much. Savannah has been extremely vocal about injustice in the prison system since her parents have been incarcerated. Many people believe that her comments have impacted how her mom and dad are being treated. Fans believe that Savannah is continuing to get her mom, Julie Chrisley, in trouble. One person took to Reddit to discuss it. They wrote, "I noticed they are sending JC back to Kentucky via the long route. It must be the same route she took to Georgia. She's still not in BOP custody. One day Sassy will learn to keep her mouth shut, but until then, enjoy the ride, Jules." Julie Chrisley sat in the back of a blacked-out SUV, the low hum of the engine the only sound accompanying her heavy thoughts. The early morning sun peeked through the horizon, casting a warm glow over the Georgia landscape. But there was no warmth in her heart. Today was the day she'd return to prison, but not in the straightforward way she expected. Due to a series of unforeseen circumstances, she was being forced to take the long route back. It was more than a physical detour. It was symbolic of the winding journey her life had taken. Her husband, Todd, had already returned to his prison. They had faced so many challenges together, weathered so many storms as a couple, and now they were separated once more. Julie clenched her fists, feeling the weight of every mistake that had led to this moment. Her once glamorous life as a reality TV star, with lavish homes and luxury at every turn, felt like a distant memory. The glittering lights of the world she once knew had dimmed, leaving behind a shadowy path that led her here. As the SUV turned onto a rural road, far from the interstates and highways she'd expected to take, she glanced out the window. Fields stretched out on either side, dotted with broken-down barns and rusting tractors, remnants of a forgotten past. The road was rough, uneven, and cracked in places, much like her life in the past few years. Julie remembered her trial, the media frenzy, the headlines that splashed her name across tabloids and news channels. She had become infamous, her family's empire of wealth and fame collapsing under the weight of scandal. The long route, it almost felt like some cruel twist of fate that she was being forced to endure this extended drive back to confinement. The legal system, ever the bureaucratic beast, had dictated that this was the only available route, due to unforeseen road closures and security concerns. But deep down, Julie wondered if this journey was meant for her. if she was being given one last opportunity to reflect before returning to the cold, impersonal walls of prison. The driver was silent, a faceless figure behind dark sunglasses and a stoic expression. Julie hadn't bothered to make small talk, knowing that her words would fall on indifferent ears. There was no point in explaining her side of the story, not to someone who saw her as just another inmate, another number in the system. The world had already made its judgment, and Julie was left to deal with the consequences. As the SUV continued down the backroads, the scenery shifted from farmland to dense forests. The trees loomed overhead, their branches intertwined like a cage, as if nature itself was closing in around her. The irony was not lost on Julie. She had once felt untouchable, invincible in her world of wealth and status, but now she was no different than anyone else. Stripped of her privileges, she was left to face the harsh realities of life. In the silence, Julie's mind wandered back to her children. The Chrisley kids had grown up in front of the cameras, their lives an open book for the world to see. But behind the glitz and glamour, there had always been a price to pay. She had tried to protect them, to shield them from the worst of it, but now they were left to pick up the pieces of the shattered family. Savannah, Chase, and Grayson. What did they think of her now? What did the world think of her as a mother? The guilt gnawed at her, a constant companion that had only grown stronger with time. The SUV hit a bump in the road, jarring Julie from her thoughts. She let out a small sigh, realizing that there was no use in dwelling on the past. What was done. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with them. Prison had been a humbling experience, to say the least. The reality of it was far removed from the luxury she had once known. There were no silk sheets, no gourmet meals, no designer clothes. It was a stark, cold world, filled with rules and regulations, where every move was watched and scrutinized. But Julie had found a strange sort of peace in the monotony of prison life. Away from the cameras, the gossip, and the judgmental eyes of the public, she had been forced to confront herself. She had time to think, to reflect, to pray. And in those quiet moments she had found a glimmer of hope, a belief that perhaps, once she had served her time, she could rebuild. It wouldn't be easy, nothing worth having ever was, but she had faith that she could still find redemption. The road ahead remained long and uncertain. The SUV continued its journey, winding through the forest like a snake, twisting and turning with no clear end in sight. Julie leaned her head against the window, watching the blur of green pass by. She didn't know what the future held, but she was determined to face it with a newfound strength. As they finally approached the outskirts of the town where the prison stood, Julie straightened up in her seat. The looming buildings of the correctional facility came into view, stark and imposing against the sky. The long route had come to an end, but her journey was far from over. She wasn't the same woman who had walked into prison the first time. Julie Chrisley had been forced to take the long route, through life, through hardship, through self-discovery, and while the road had been rough, it had also given her something she hadn't expected, a chance to change. As the SUV came to a stop and the door opened, Julie stepped out, her heart heavy but her spirit determined. This was her reality, but it didn't have to define her forever. The long route back to prison might have been grueling, but it had also given her the clarity to see that, perhaps, it was still a way forward.